We're here right now in the Startwell media studio. It's an incredible, prolific space with just really great energy. I'm conducting roundtable discussion series in the metaverse on a platform called Verbella. The title of our series is called Inspired People, Inspired Places. The notion being that all that's required to have an inspired place, whether that's physical or digital, are inspired people. I'm Dave Cairns. I'd call myself really more a content creator on the future of work and living than I would a commercial real estate agent, but I kind of moonlight as a real estate agent. I'm a believer in the distributed work movement that is taking shape, and I think that the answer to that equation is offering space as a service in a multitude of ways. And to plug you at Startwell, I mean, you guys are at the bleeding edge of a really important aspect of meeting the needs of dispersed teams, which is to bring people together in intentional ways to gather, basically, not to work alongside, but to gather. I'm one of the co-founders of the platform, along with one of my good friends, Chris Moeller. We're obviously partnered up directly with Verbella and their Open Campus team, which have been just really great support for us to be able to bring this conversation to life. We're conducting it in a virtual environment for a couple of key reasons. One is there are elements of interacting in this virtual capacity that I think bring out really good human qualities. You'll find that people really are coming to these conversations with a lot of mutual respect and wanting to hear people out, and I just love that about it. But when I think of my life over the last 3 years, predominantly doing these kinds of things over a two-dimensional Zoom call, I mean, this virtual world is like night and day better. There's no comparison in my mind to how much more engaging that conversation can be in a virtual environment. You have the feeling of being among the people that you are participating in the conversation with, which I've just found doesn't come through in the same way through a Zoom webinar. It is cool to be able to skeuomorph being in what would otherwise be a physical space with a group of people. You can't do that on Zoom, but you can do that in a metaverse platform, and it's very compelling. I think this environment is still pressing on. I think that as time goes on, it's going to be part of the platform of work, and companies are going to make further investments, in my belief, in these virtual environments. And a place is just a place unless it's activated by a group of people that are there for a shared purpose and want to carry an important conversation forward. It doesn't matter whether that's happening in person, on Zoom, or in a virtual environment. To me, like, media is also part of the platform of work. The personal brands of the employees of an organization are starting to actually become more valuable than that of even the corporate brand itself. They may have something that they want to bring to life, which is best done through, spaces that are adequately set up for media. So, like, I think what's happening in this whole future of work conversation is two things are really at play. One is that coming into an office environment is more representative of a drop-in experience for the average employee than it is a place where you just go and type away for 8 hours. But the other thing is it's actually to execute on really intentional pieces of work. And this is one of them, obviously, for me right now. So to be able to come into a professional environment and get the benefit of like leveling up what I'm doing, I think it's a no-brainer that every organization in the world should be looking for ways to prop up their employees to do more of that. Okay, it's a wrap. Thanks, Startwell.
Yeah, so there you go. Thanks for doing that, Dave. That was awesome.
Thanks. I hate my voice, but thank you.
Well, with that, and being that we've already kind of gotten started, I think thanks for coming, Inspired People, Inspired Places. I think this is our 7th or 8th show. Really excited to have you guys here with us this time. It is being recorded, so we'll have a YouTube video of it once we get through post-production. So with that, to my trusty sidekick, Dave, the man Cairns.
Thank you. And so
man.
Lisa, Brian, Mark, welcome. Thank you for being our guests today. If inclined, as we've already discussed a few times, feel free to throw yourself up on camera behind us, but also feel free to just go avatar style. I'm going to jump right in because I just want to be respectful of everybody's time and make sure we have a good conversation. So a few housekeeping things up front. I'm going to give each of you the opportunity after I do a little introduction to introduce yourselves. And then we're going to have 3 segments to the conversation, each about 15 minutes in length. If each of you end up having 5 minutes of talk time per kind of segment, that's all good. If not, we'll kind of like, duck, dive, weave, and dodge and figure out what else to talk about within each segment. But that's how it will go. Does that sound good, panelists? Or I guess I'm looking for affirmation from you guys.
Sounds great, Dave.
Okay,
Good.
perfect.
Your slides
Okay,
up,
awesome.
brother.
Okay, so we're here to talk about the hybrid dividend and just hybrid working in general. With the caveat that I'm going somewhere productive, I'm going to say that hybrid work to me just really felt like a meaningless buzzword this whole time. It's just felt like corporate speak to me, and I guess coming from a really kind of corporate organization with a lot of like corporate words like bucket and things of that nature, I tend to shy away from these buzzwords. But then I often kind of ask myself, like, if work was a consumer product, would the consumer themselves actually call it hybrid? Then, as I keep pondering, which I guess I do a lot more than I should these days because I don't have a lot of leases to sign, I just attempt to access my self-awareness, and I remind myself that it may be that I just don't necessarily identify with the word hybrid, and that potentially remote work, which is an equally buzzy word, but one that I like better because to me it equals freedom and choice, whereas hybrid to me equals rigidity. So, like, how we identify with these words that sort of quickly became part of the zeitgeist, perhaps a little too early as a result of everybody getting thrown in to this pandemic experiment. I ask myself, is that the cause of some of the significant tension that we're facing right now? And perhaps that's also because I have a wife who has a Jean-Paul Sartre quote on her wrist that says words are loaded pistols. So I do spend also a lot of time thinking about the power of words. And so, with that, I kind of keep going with it. Like, what is remote work? What is hybrid work? What is distributed work? And how do we simultaneously establish broad consensus about the best practices within the knowledge economy while still granularly scrutinizing unique team and individual needs? And so the only thing I can really come up with when I keep thinking about it is that the things that remain obvious is that the problem is complex, and that we probably ended up having a lot more early adopters than would usually be the case with any innovation. So, while this is all hard, I also believe that the solutions will likely reveal themselves as elegant and simple once we can finally look in the rearview mirror and kind of breathe that sigh of relief. When all these definitions of work, they kind of melt off, we get back to the word work, except this time we're maybe not prefacing it with, I have to go, ... So in closing this little monologue of mine, I guess what I'll say is that it's my assertion that there are status quo peddlers out there who are using the word hybrid as a way of boiling the frog, but it's equally my assertion that there are change agents that are out there that are using the word as a way to get in the door so that they can eventually bust that door down and shape some meaningful change. So with that, today, our Inspired People, Inspired Places community is pleased to be joined by who I would argue are 3 undeniable change agents in Mark Gilbraith and Lisa Harvey, both from Liquid Space, and Brian Elliott, who is the founder of Future Forum and a seasoned technology and HR executive. Guys, welcome. Thank you so much for coming. And I would love it if I could start with Lisa. Lisa, if you could introduce yourself in whatever way you see fit. And in doing so, if you could just mention what piqued your interest, I guess, aside from us asking you to join us, to come in and embrace this sort of virtual environment.
Yep, I'm just getting myself up on the camera because I'd much prefer that you see who you're talking to.
Great. There we go.
Voila. There we go. Okay. So hi, my name is Lisa. I'm sitting here from Sydney, Australia. I have no problem with what time it is at the moment. I'm just hoping you don't mind if I am a bit sluggish on some of my words, so forgive me. A bit about me, the pattern of my career is I've always been in service of helping organizations, individuals and teams be more effective in why, what, and how they do it. I'm a HR generalist. I've got 20 plus years experience in culture and capability transformation. And about 10 years ago, I fell into workplace transformation and I fell in love. I actually think it has the power, when used in service of culture and business performance, to reap benefits for both individuals and the business. The motivation for my work at the moment is that with all that's gone on with COVID, I want to ensure that we maintain or sustain the magic of human connection. Why am I sitting around this table? I've got people from all around the world that are sitting around here, like-minded people who are seeking to progress a conversation. And I think it's a privilege to be here. So thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Lisa. Mark, keeping it liquid space style, let's go with you next.
Thanks, Dave. So responding to the same question, like what inspired me to come? Well, one, there's the gravitational pull of Dave Cairns, but I'd say what I'm drawn to is any opportunity to just be a part of and contribute to what I think is just a vital conversation, and that really is around how do we reform, rebuild, put back together the world of work and place. It's been a topic area that I've been deeply involved in for now 16 years, 12 of those as the skipper and founder of Liquid Space. And in those 12 years, we've been looking to bring technology-enabled solutions to bear in sort of the problem space of connecting people to place over time, in a way that's much more in tune with the individual needs of the worker, of the people, much more in rhythm with the sort of crushing realities of what the planet needs, and much more economically efficient, for the benefit of organizations and companies who carry the tab for the built landscape and the office landscape. So, high level Liquid Space, is a company that's focused on happy people. We work in the service of organizations and their employees who are, thankfully today, post-pandemic, putting renewed energy and attention around kind of rethinking the longstanding model of real estate. And we believed, 12 years ago when we launched Liquid Space, we thought the traditional real estate model, with its rigid long-term commitments to space, with its mandates and sort of default assumption around presenteeism, with what we've referred to as sort of a benevolent or a well-intended but nonetheless arrogant sort of authority that says, I, the company, know better than you might in terms of the environment where you'll thrive. We were challenging those assumptions and preaching the gospel of flexibility and choice for the better part of 10 years. And then lo and behold, a black swan event happened 3 years ago, in the form of a devastating pandemic, which has at least one silver lining. And I think that is it's loosened the grip of companies and the establishment on their convictions around an office and a single location-based approach to work and workplace. So, bit of a ramble there, Dave. I apologize, but
No, that was great. That was great, Mark. That was really
very
great.
excited to be here in the conversation. Yeah.
Thank you for that, Brian. You are like the best third wheel we could have. So welcome, and I'd love for you to introduce yourself too.
Thanks, all. We'll get my camera up here in a moment, I think. Let's try to hijack Darren Murph. I had a conversation with Darren yesterday. I think he won't mind my hijacking his face with my face. Hey, yeah, that's me. Cool. I'm Brian Elliott. Spent about 25 years tech as a startup CEO at Google, at Slack. The old phrase, culture eats strategy for breakfast, is one that I learned the hard way. It's true. The most product problems, most strategy problems are secondary to whether or not you can get talented people excited, engaged, and working well together to fulfill whatever mission it is that you've got. In the beginning of the pandemic, I actually, we're a think tank, backed by Slack, Boston Consulting Group, MillerKnoll, and Management Leadership for Tomorrow. They did two things really. We did a lot of research. Our Future Form Pulse, which is a survey of a bit over 10,000 office workers around the globe on a quarterly basis to understand what was and wasn't working for people. And just engaging with a lot of executives, of them in larger, more established, more legacy organizations that were really grappling with, the pandemic itself at the beginning, but actually with how they were going to come back from it. Because Mark, carrying on your theme, the pandemic itself was horrible, but the outcomes in terms of our openness to rethinking the assumptions that 9 to 5, 5 days a week in the office, are where and when and how work happens, and that it works for everybody, which it doesn't, was sort of challenged, and people are much more open. Sitting at a point today, though, where I think a lot of people are back yet again in that same debate of backwards to what worked in 2019 for some people, or should we sort of find some way forward? That's why I'm excited to be here with all of you today. I love these conversations, and the sort of virtual version, round table, where we can sort of see each other is sort of a great way to do that and feel a little bit more interactive in doing so. So I'm excited to get into it, talk about the research, talk about what I'm seeing in other companies, and also talk about why I don't particularly care for the terms remote or hybrid myself.
There we go. Love it. Love it. Love all those references. And yeah, thank you to everybody for having the intellectual curiosity to sit around a virtual table. My personal experience of it has been that some of those receptors in my brain that make us feel like we're around a campfire or being cooked for whatever reason, for me, they come out and they fire. I'd be curious to chat with any of you after to get your own take on the same. With that, let's jump into the first question. Chris, if you're able to throw up that post that someone made yesterday, that'd be great. So I did something I'd not done before, and I decided to sort of more formally write my opening monologue and put it out as a post. It was not my most viral post, so that may say something about how good or bad it was. But nonetheless, someone actually reshared it, and I really loved what they said in resharing it. And without reading the whole thing, effectively, they made the comment up front that if there are 8 billion people on the planet, are there 8 billion companies? And are we ultimately moving towards a world where it's work your way, and that these hybrids and remotes are sort of signals of the ongoing transition to being able to liberate ourselves and work the way that we want to work? And he ended with a quote by Naval Ravikant from 2011 that said, "There are almost 7 billion people on the planet. Someday I hope there will be almost 7 billion companies." Now, we could look at that literally or sort of theoretically. I choose to look at it theoretically. So I guess with that added context, because clearly I sparked at least one person's brain with that monologue, my question to you guys, and I'd like to start with Lisa, is hybrid work a stopover, or is it our final destination? So that's my opening question for Lisa to start.
Thanks, Chris. I actually still I wanted to comment on the post, and the word that was coming to mind for me was hyper-personalization. And I'll expand on that as I respond to your question. So for me, COVID was a catalyst. We don't need to talk about that, but it's represented, it's a generational transformation that we're in the process of. We're 3 years in. I believe we've got another 2 years before we stabilize, and the remaining 5 will be about sustaining and adapting the change. What we at Liquid Space are dealing with, we feel we're dealing with the innovators or the pioneers or the trailblazers, because there are 3 things that need to be in place to truly enact and progress the change. That being the narrative that the organization holds true to as to what their employee experience will be in the context of hybrid. The second one is that they need to have a hybrid portfolio. They can't just be looking at place as fixed, being office and home. It needs to be ubiquitous, including this digital environment that we're experiencing today. And the third thing is they need to have an activation plan. And so what's the change management to get to the desired experience? What we know is that technology isn't the issue. Technology, as we can see right now, is enhancing more and more. We know that real estate isn't the issue. What the noisy conversation is happening at the moment is gathering. And so that for us is the focal point at Liquid Space as to the problem to solve for. And gathering is a conversation that is very noisy and it's polarizing. And what we're seeing is organizations, we're seeing organizations that are seeking a fixed or a forced outcome. Is it 3 days a week? Is it 4.2 days a fortnight? Just tell me what the end state is. Let's stop having the conversation and let's move on. The second thing is organizations are holding too tightly to the narrative at the organizational layer. And they're applying a one-size-fits-all model across the organization. And the third thing that we're seeing is that, sorry, I've lost my train there. So what we know as a result of that is if we're fixed enforcing the outcome and we're holding the narrative too tightly, you're forcing people to come in and exist in part in a space like we did pre-COVID. And so we know that there will be well-being impacts to that and lifestyle impacts to that. On the flip side, Liquid Space is we're seeing evidence in companies that we're working with, and combined with the thought leadership that we're working on, is that we have 3 beliefs. First thing is that gathering needs to be dynamic, and it's a construct that's in service of the nature of the business, cycle that the business is in, the team, and the nature of the work that they're doing, and then right down to the individual and the dimensions that actually form the work-life and lifestyle attributes that create a desire and a need for them to gather. The second thing is gathering needs to be curated at 3 levels. It needs to be curated and personalized at the organization level, the team level, and the individual level. And so what we believe is then, sorry, I've just lost my mouse there.
No worries. This is great. All of it's great.
My apologies. So we believe that gathering is dynamic, that gathering should be personalized and curated, and that organizations, teams, and individuals need to adopt an experimental and adapting mindset so they can look at the cycles of gathering and how it needs to change in service of the changing organization, team, and individual. So I believe that hybrid is here to stay, but I believe it's the organizations that know that it's dynamic and personalize, that hyper-personalization at both the organization, the team, and the individual level will actually create sustainable change in the future of work.
That's great. Thank you, Lisa. I would love to go next to Brian so that we don't melt away off the bat. Bad joke, Liquid Space joke. Brian, please go ahead.
Oh my. Not a problem. Hang on a second. Verbella's asking me to do something while I'm at it. Slight confusion. See if I can get my camera up again. I'm giving it a shot.
And if you need any prompting or reprompting, just let me know.
I mean, I'm spot on with what Lisa was saying. Like when you look at the data in our research, the vast majority of employees want to come together. They want to come together at least once a month. There are people that want something that's less than that, once a quarter or less. But most people want to come together with their team in order to do socialization and connection as much as collaboration together. There's also, by the way, 20% of the population globally that needs an office space 5 days a week because, you know, home doesn't work for them, either physically or just in terms of their desire for a separation between. But setting that group aside, like the desire for socialization, social connection with your team is real. I think my challenge with hybrid is like picking up on where Lisa left off. It's used as a cudgel in some ways. Too often what you're seeing these days is the, hey, look, 3 days a week, Monday, Wednesday, and Thursday is the answer, and therefore everybody should be in Monday, Thursday. And that sort of one size fits all approach is obviously running into employee resistance, but for good reasons. Most teams, most organizations, especially those over 1,000 people, are more distributed now than they were before the pandemic. If less than half of the teams inside of your organization don't even live in the same city, don't have people all, you know, co-located, telling them that the 3 days a week are the days they need to be in order to be there with their teams is just nonsensical. Second, it doesn't work for the patterns and rhythms of different parts of the organization. Usually what you're talking about is that that decision-making process that's been done on high is this sort of one-size-fits-all model we would never do to our customers. We would never say you can have anything as long as it's a black size medium t-shirt, but we think it's going to work for our employees. Instead, we got to move it down. We got to find ways in which we provide frameworks for what we want to have happen as an organization overall. For example, at a minimum, people should get together once a quarter for socialization, gatherings, belonging, but let teams decide it on their own, and then support them, encourage them. And that takes work, it takes effort to do it. The other, I think, bigger issue from that phrase, the 3 days a week, and that's our hybrid solution, also disguises something that's a little bit more insidious, which is, are you really making the decision that you're office centric? Because in doing so, what a lot of executives are doing is saying, hey, look, folks that are coming back in are the ones that are going to get the rewards of opportunity and promotion. And those that don't, yeah, we've afforded you more flexibility. Reality. And that will, from a talent perspective, long-term not work out terribly well for them. But in the short term, it's what I think a lot of people are really afraid of, which is becomes an excuse for really pushing your way back to an office-centric way of working that hasn't worked for a large part of the population.
Awesome. Brian, before I move on to Mark, I'm just kind of curious if you have any really quick anecdotal commentary on how we derive our socialization and whether or not that you feel it might be better for people to have more autonomy over how they socialize and not necessarily be in a forced office one. And do you feel that the headlines ring true in the sense of like loneliness and isolation, and that if people, aren't forced to go to an office, they will isolate themselves? Do you have any commentary on that?
I don't think great topic, and it's a gnarly one, because some of the challenges with social isolation and loneliness are ones that are societal and much, much, much broader. In a lot of ways, the challenge has become that work has become the social network, especially for people in the US, because you've seen the falling by the wayside of whether it's local community or religion or whatever clubs people belong to once upon a time. I think the thing to be careful about is that really what we want is your only socialization occurs through work. It's not terribly healthy in a lot of ways. Same time, people do want connection with their team. My own team saw this and felt it. We would get together on a once a quarter basis. We would do 3 days that was about meals together. It was about deeper understanding of one another. It was about volunteer activities. In theory, it was supposed to be about things like strategic planning, but that was wicked secondary to just getting to know one another. And those quarterly gatherings just gave us a bigger, broader sense of who we were as individuals than even with great practices we were able to do on a regular basis. Some research coming out, by the way, from a couple of academics that I know in one company started looking at this and saying, those monthly and quarterly gatherings, what do they do for you? And it's really fantastic, and it lasts a lot longer than the 3 days afterwards if you orchestrate it right, and if you do it in a way in which people actually get engaged with each other more deeply.
Awesome. Thank you for commenting on that. So Mark, before you jump in, I want to let you know that I'd like you to close, and I'm actually going to get you to answer question 2 to start. Just in the interest of keeping on time, if you could be briefer on your response to this question, that would be great. And then I'll tee you up for the second question. So to orient you again, is this a stopover, this whole hybrid work thing, or is it a destination that we're arriving at?
I think it's neither. I think it is the sort of secular enduring new state that we have to get to, but it's not an endpoint. In stark contrast to how we used to think about workplace and how real estate professionals would solve for it. They'd choose an explicit address. they would procure an explicit amount of capacity, 200,000 square feet in the Salesforce Tower. They would define what they would lay down laws such as, Brian will have 170 square feet for his cubicle. Its walls will be 48 inches high. It was extremely deterministic. That is not the new state that we must have. The new state is one that, as both Brian and Lisa spoke to, puts choice in the hands of the individuals, and as such, it's infinite, right? The location, the place, the form, the format of the new workplace is infinite because the places themselves are near infinite. So I think I'll let that point stand. The other thing I'd like to touch on, I'll pick up on a word that Brian used, which was gnarly. Like, this is a gnarly challenge. Like, we're wrestling with age-old cultural perceptions. We're wrestling with crushing environmental mandates, enormous economic sums. We're talking about a $4 trillion real estate industry that is perhaps looking down the barrel of a trillion or $2 trillion haircut. So against that backdrop, acknowledging and honoring that it's a gnarly challenge, how do you solve gnarly challenges with a product mindset? You got to frame the problem and you've got to break it down to decomplexify it. And as it relates to solving for this new higher state or higher plane of work and workplace, both Lisa and Brian sort of commented on sort of several layers at which you need to think about the problem. There are the organizational needs for gathering. So that's the quarterly all hands, the annual business review, there are team level requirements for gathering, the performance review, the scrum meeting, the sales meeting. And then there are vitally important and uniquely personal individual reasons to gather, sense of belonging, the reward of productivity. And so thinking about how you approach an enable work and workplace, framing element one, you got to think about it at the organizational, team, and individual level. There's not a one size fits all. Similarly, the rhythms and the needs at those different levels are unique and should be honored. I'll pause it there, Dave, and let you tee up the next question if you like.
Yeah, that's great. And I mean, you guys are kind of, the great thing about this is that you're bleeding into really my second question. So, I mean, I guess I'll tee it up, but I have a more pointed way that I now want to phrase it. But, I think we could probably all agree that productivity is the byproduct of an employee that's physically and mentally well as also engaged with the work at hand. But there seems to be this really, really challenging element of defining where that employee is most likely to achieve that enlightened state. So Mark, to start off with you, as a founder and a CEO of your own organization that is of course tasked with making sure that people are well physically, mentally, and are engaged with their work, like, why is it that you feel the approach that you have, which is clearly one of choice and autonomy, is the one that works? And my specific question to you is, what would you say to a CEO that maybe has a different point of view from a completely unfiltered perspective while still being respectful? I would just love to know, like, what's the inner monologue of Mark Gilbraith, and really I want it from all of you, around what it is that you think that these leaders need to get that they're not getting?
Okay, I'll take a whack at that, Dave. First, though, I guess I'd like to preempt that by saying productivity is one measure of the human outcome. I think it's a desirable one. I think individuals want to feel like they're productive, and certainly the companies that employ them and pay them for work, they're doing so to achieve the productivity outcome. But I think their state of mental health, their well-being, is another measure, right? And you'll see that all too often that is held privately because no one is attending to it or asking the questions or leaning in with care and compassion. But I think you'll see the echoes of their actual well-being in things. It will echo into their productivity, but it'll also echo into their retention. It'll echo into their interactions with other colleagues. And I think there are other metrics around sort of hiring and the like that are going to be reflections of competence to productivity, but additional dimensions that are important to be attentive to in assessing the human impact of how and where work happens. To your directed question, what's my inner dialogue about, or my external dialogue, frankly, because I've not been shy about sharing it. Like, I think human beings are individual animals. Here in this 21st century, I think we finally appreciate that we all live on a spectrum, right? I mean that in a positive sense. We're all unique, and the personality that we bring to our lives and the tasks we carry out, and the nature of those tasks themselves are all unique. I've often said if I hired two accountants that went to the very same college, got the very same degree, had the very same GPA, and I put them in cubes side by side, in the same floor to do the very same job as new college grads, and presumed that they would be equally productive, I'd be missing the point. They may have vastly different personalities. The environments in which they do their best work. We in Liquid Space, we talk about work from where it works for you. Those environments where they might thrive best could be radically different as a function of what they're working on in the moment, but also their personalities and their human needs. And so I think certainly there are some individuals that are perhaps sociopathic, that are immune to that self-awareness or don't have that own self-awareness, but I think the vast majority of humans can relate to a dialogue like that. And so how do we persuade the recalcitrant to embrace this new notion around flexibility and choice? I think we encourage them to be self-reflective and understand that, you know, you sort of tune into your own uniqueness and recognize that applies to environment choice as well. Back to you, Dave.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Mark. Lisa, I would like to ask you, and then Brian the same, if there's anything that's just coming to you to add on to what Mark said. Doesn't have to be in specific reference to the question that I asked. Lisa, I'll go with you first, and if there's nothing there, we can move forward.
No, thanks, Dave. I suppose if I wanted to riff off the conversation with the CEO, what I'd be asking the CEO is, how do they measure the dividend on their human capital now? And some of the aspects we know they look at is advocacy, loyalty, and engagement. And so there's financial metrics that can be associated with that. If I look at then, what are the implications depending on the type of model you want to put in place in regards to workplace and workplace experience? I'd be looking at, well, if you want to fix and force an outcome, what's the potential risk that you're introducing to your business? So ignoring the economic ROI on your real estate costs, the fact that you might be limiting a distributed workforce, a global, being able to tap into a distributed workforce. If we look at forcing and fixing the number of days coming in, the latest language I saw was rage quitting and resenteeism. So we've gone through this whole pattern of the great calibration, the great resignation. They were the latest words that I saw. And we are seeing this play out on social media in where organizations haven't got the narrative right and they are forcing, then we're seeing the implications of that from both a brand and a cultural perspective. Then if we start to move along to organizations who want to empower and trust and untether where and when people work, we then need to look at the dividend of that. And so we know there is well-being benefits onto that. We know we will get advocacy. We know we will get loyalty. But what the real human dividend we need to focus on is back to this gathering element again. And so where is the real value in bringing people together? And Mark did touch on it, but we have 3 beliefs. The first one is that sense of belonging. So we want to gather in service of building our social capital and building our organizational tacit knowledge, because I know that then I belong to this tribe, but equally I have the networks and the knowledge to be able to do my job more effectively. The second thing is we gather in service the performance of a team. So what is the nature of gathering, or the nature of the work that would determine it's best done of us gathering together to progress that work or to deliver that work? The compounding benefit to that is the reward of delivering that work together. And then finally, we need to look at these experiences that we curate that actually deliver delight, whether that's in the form of cultural symbols of that organization, or in the form of I understand the people that I'm gathering with, and we introduce moments that delight them. And so we know, once again, if we're looking at this as a benefits model that a CEO pays attention to, he's paying attention to, sorry, my goodness, he or she or they are paying attention to advocacy, loyalty, and engagement. And we know that gathering impacts belonging, sense of belonging, it impacts satisfies, and it impacts performance. And that's the nature of the conversation I'd be having with them. There's a point about loneliness I want to touch on, but I'm happy to wait till my next segment.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. And frankly, Lisa, if you're able to even hang back and talk a little bit more about the loneliness piece and connecting, I think that would be great. But yeah, Brian, I'm actually going to move to our final question here, just in the interest of making sure that we have some time for questions and answers. But again, before I do that, everybody here, if you could stay once we're done, just to grab a quick photo at the front, that would be great. And if you do have extra time, Brian and Mark and Lisa should be able to be here until 1:45 p.m. But we do want to respect your ability to get out of here if you have to. Okay, so with that, Chris, yeah, you could throw the final post up there. So it wouldn't be a conversation without Chris Hurd. At least that's how it feels for me. So I will transition here and just say that I've spent a lot of time lately asking myself if the whole knowledge economy getting thrust into this remote work experiment will eventually be something that we look back on as the great enabler or the great detractor when it comes to a more equitable and inclusive future of work. And it turns out I'm not fully alone. Chris Hurd recently wrote something similar. And he basically said there's an outside risk that the pandemic ends up being the worst thing for distributed work, with the idea being that an uncomfortable amount of early adopters ended up adopting the quote unquote iPhone, which is, whatever, distributed working or working away from the office. So I guess my question to you guys would be, whether we call it the remote revolution, the distributed revolution, the hybrid revolution, whatever it is, will March of 2020 be the best or the worst thing that ever happened to the progression of whatever we define as this movement? So Brian, what do you think? We can't hear you, Brian. I don't know if you're on mute, but we can't hear you.
Yeah, I muted the world. There we go.
Man, I got the camera up beforehand this time, and I got ready, and I even got my head swiveled back to face Dave, and I still didn't unmute it.
It seems to be a universal technical challenge. We would just embrace it and go.
My answer to the question is still the best thing, as opposed to the worst thing. Look, it's clear that some people and a lot of organizations simply did a lift and shift. They took existing practices in offices, they shoved them into people's homes, and they really didn't deal with broader issues of flexibility like schedule and time flexibility. And you can also see a lot of retrograde motion that's happening now, especially driven by, to be honest, older white guys like me who are pushing for something that worked for them in the 1980s, 1990s, and the aughts. All of that said, though, you're also seeing a lot of organizations, even outside of tech, that are taking a more flexible approach. So my favorite these days are to talk about folks like Allstate Insurance Company, got rid of the big corporate headquarters in suburban Chicago and let teams figure out the patterns and the rhythms that are right for them. So they end up with like content designers that are coming back into an office in downtown Chicago 3 or 4 days a week, because that's how they want to work and how they want to be together, versus the people team that's actually coming together, once a month for 3 days. Those types of arrangements in companies that you wouldn't think of as being, the small, nimble tech company are really the ones that impress me more. And what those people will then do is they'll turn around and they will steal talent from other organizations, right? So if you are someone that's looking for and needs that flexibility because you're a caregiver, because you're an introvert, because you have different abilities, or simply because you value it, you're going to migrate to organizations that take this forward. And we now live in a world in which talent is the determinant of competitive success, right? It isn't physical capital. It's not financial capital. The world of change is not going to slow down. The world of technology is clearly not slowing down. Your ability to attract, talented people to your mission is going to impact whether or not you're successful. And post-pandemic, 75% of people are still saying if their organization doesn't give them the flexibility they need, they will look elsewhere. So the economic, ups and downs that are sort of chastising some people back into the office these days, long term, it's still a game where talent wins. And so I think we're in for a world in which flexibility becomes more normal, not less normal, over the long haul.
Well said. Well said. Lisa, would you like to go next?
I'll go last if that's okay.
Sure.
Do it
Sure.
last, let's go.
Mark, go ahead then.
Yeah, best or worst. I'll second Brian. I think these horrible events of the pandemic will mark the beginning of the best time, and it'll be enduring. And I think, further to Brian's comments, one of the drivers, or one of the reasons why the genie's not going back in the proverbial bottle, is that the dividend from this, or we sort of coined it the hybrid dividend of this direction of travel, is now being proven. The data is coming out now, and there are two powerful components of it. One is a purely economic dividend that companies have realized in terms of rationalizing their traditional portfolio in conjunction with enabling access to space on demand when and where needed. And the early adopters that have been into this for the better part of 2 years now are seeing 10 to 20x reductions in the real cost of workplace for their enabled employees. So you've got an undeniable and incredibly powerful bottom line economic argument that I think is going to persuade even the conservatives who may not believe in the social or human dimension, but the economic power is going to be undeniable, and it fuels the ability to invest dollars in other things, more great people, more R&D, more growth. The other dimension of the hybrid dividend is the human dimension, and Lisa spoke eloquently about it. And it's more challenging to quantify, but even there, the evidence is mounting in the sentiment studies and the reports and the productivity outcomes that are being documented. And Future Forum's been a tremendous sort of wellspring of that data. So I think unequivocally best is the answer, Dave.
Great, thank you. And Lisa, I'm excited now to know that you want to go last.
I just do, oh, hang on. I'll just pop me back up again. My apologies. There we go. Let me take you on a bit of a journey back to the 1980s, because what's really coming up for me now is well-being and an educated and informed individual that's empowered to make the choices that are in service of their work life and their lifestyle. So back in the 80s, we saw a rise in females coming into the workplace, so dual incomes and the social implications of that for families. We also saw technology was able to empower us to work longer in different locations. And the third thing we noticed was the hustle culture. So if you're on, you've got to be always on to actually develop and grow in an organization. COVID comes, so leading into COVID, we actually had a looming mental health crisis. The hustle culture wasn't working for us. We're working longer hours and issues with that work-life balance. COVID comes along and everyone picks up within 2 weeks and they're working at home and everyone thinks this is amazing. So our lifestyle benefit automatically shifts overnight and we start investing more in our family, our well-being, our hobbies. And the performance impact remained relatively the same, if not better. And the reason being is we had enough social capital and business acumen built into the system to be able to sustain it for a period of time. It was an unnatural environment. And so as we've emerged out of COVID, we needed to then start making decisions. Well, what does the employee experience going to look like for an organization? And what's the implications on that for an employee? And they had then choices to make. Do I still want to buy into this organization and the value proposition and what they stand for? Or do I need to make choices that I now have seen the benefit of my lifestyle? Now, what we're seeing now is the unintended consequences of people favoring too far on the lifestyle side and not enough attention on the work-life side. And so what I mean by that, there are a number of dimensions that actually ensure that we have that sense of belonging at work, that we're performing, and we're satisfied. And so we're seeing now a rise in loneliness, isolation, disconnection, anxiety, loss of confidence, and shame that exists in an organization. And so what's happening here is people's social capital and business acumen is reducing. And then for those people that are changing roles in the organization or even outside of the organization, they're finding it harder to build the social capital and the business acumen in the speed they previously did it in their old organization. So the wobbles that people have when they start new to a role in an organization are quicker and also more deeper. And so what we need to be careful of is, or what we need to be mindful of is, how do we inform and educate an employee to say, what are the dimensions of my work life and what are the dimensions of my lifestyle? And how do I drive a gathering need that's in alignment and in service of both? Noting that my lifestyle and my work life changes over time. So the need for me to gather will actually change within my organization as well. The final thing I want to note is, and this is where I think the real rubber will hit the road, is if the organization stays high in the narrative and the need to gather, which are just symbols of the experience they're trying to create, the real rubber will hit the road with the team. So an informed and educated individual who knows what work life and lifestyle alignment looks like then brings their needs plus a compassion hat into their team to then look at what is the gathering needs of my team and the nature of the work that we need to deliver to be successful. And so the reason why I'm saying compassion is I may have been at an organization for 10 years. I don't need to build my social acumen, my social capital and my business acumen. But if I have 3 new starters in my team, I actually need to be in service of building theirs as quickly as possible, because then we create high performing teams.
Really, really well said. Really, really well said. And I really love that you framed it around obviously the collective, but even with respect to the work consideration, you're still noting it as what's best for the individual. You know, how do they actually consider their well-being holistically? So I thought that was great. Chris, I'll turn it over to you. For the group, we're supposed to end in 4 minutes. If you want to end in 4 minutes, please feel free to go. But if everyone's got more time, we'll hang back too. The one thing we'd love to be able to do is just grab a quick photo at the front. So I'll turn to Chris and see if we have a few questions we can cover from the audience.
Yeah, thanks guys. The amazing content in there, amazing thoughts. Thank you very much. Couple of questions that are in the chat. First, I'll throw it to Sarah. Sarah had a question asking about a tipping point, and then maybe you can toss it over to Stephen asking about the type of manager.
Yeah, for sure. Really, thank you all for being here. This was a great conversation as always. I just am curious in thinking about the change that is needing to happen and that is happening that we've been talking about. Do any of you think or foresee a point at which we have a kind of critical mass and at that point it just kind of falls in, or is this more just a drip over time? Versus hitting an avalanche point, if you will.
Oh, I think with the average value of a public REIT down 40 to 50%, with millions of remote or hybrid jobs posted on LinkedIn, with marches in downtown Seattle from emboldened and enlightened employees objecting to famous employers' policies, I think we're at avalanche stage, and I think the final christening of this is going to be the case studies that are happening right now that make the economic and the human case for it. But I think we're in full avalanche mode. If you consider that so many people had these concepts 20 years ago and labored for decades trying to advance these principles. And now in the space of 24 months, 36 months, we've seen extraordinary change. So yeah, tsunami, not avalanche, but yeah, the tsunami is flowing without question. And the people on the right side of history are surfing that wave.
Thank you.
Stephen, maybe you want to ask your question?
Sure, Chris. Yeah, I was just commenting on, the state of the managers that we currently have, in a lot of the different industries right now, that they were probably unprepared for what was coming to them. And I think, that goes back even further, that a lot of our people managers became process and program managers and less people. So the people will eventually started managing themselves, but that, do we need a new breed of managers that are actually trained and can learn how to deal with remote and flexible and hybrid work arrangements, how to help people determine what is deliverable when we're not looking at a clock anymore, make sure that people are staying involved if they're in the right positions. Maybe somebody really needs to be in the office and, they're just not raising their hand to do that, and, managers can look for the projects or the teams that can make that happen.
Lisa, do you want to try to respond to some of that from your perspective of people officer?
Yeah, definitely. I'm happy to pick that up. I'm going to use the analogy of technology. The technology existed pre-COVID. COVID actually forced us to use the technology that was there. And leadership capability has been an ongoing problem for decades in regards to whether it's performance management, creating an inclusive culture, creating high-performing teams. And so we need to, yes, we do need to build leadership capability. Do we need to wipe out the existing base of leaders? Definitely not. But we just need to give them the language and the tools, but equally individuals the language and the tools to be able to come to a conversation. And it's an ongoing conversation. Once again, this is not an end state. It's a construct that will continue to go forward. There was another point no, I've lost the final point, sorry.
There'll be plenty of time. Picking up on that, maybe a little bit, Brian, talking about, the construct of management and the advent of technology. Obviously platforms are playing a major role now in distributed work. Can you speak to that just a touch with your technology background on how a platform comes into people?
Yeah, definitely. Picking up and actually continuing it on from what Lisa was saying, like managers were largely woefully unprepared, brought to us, right? And what the pandemic showed was, mediocrity in management all of a sudden became much more visible because, a manager who simply, monitored whether people were showing up or not, didn't know how to operate and what to do. And in particular, didn't know how to use technology and tools. And it shows up because you see stats and results that show that's the most burned out group, period. We also see, though, is like the pandemic basically had a bunch of people picking up and using Zoom. And the 30-minute video call became the solution for every known interpersonal problem. And you kept yourself into this in-sync world, right? Where meetings and 30-minute video calls were the way that you solved a 5-minute conversation. No wonder some of those folks wanted to go back into the office. What we really lacked pretty often is training people on how to use asynchronous as well as synchronous ways of communicating with each other. We saw this in Slack like crazy. That's why Slack built the Huddles feature, for example, which is quick contextual, voice conversation in the channel or between two people. Because the problem has become, if I'm having a problem with Dave and I don't like, something that he's written to me, like, hey, let's talk it out. I'll look at your calendar for time next week, 30 minutes, and then, we don't solve the problem and it doesn't happen. So even things as simple as able to literally pick up the phone and call somebody or text message them. You don't have to be using the world's greatest and latest technology to make this happen, but you've got to retrain human beings into rethinking and questioning how they operate, whether or not in sync is always the answer, and what activities you do want to have as a call or versus a shared video versus written communication. And that takes practice, it takes effort, it takes training for people, case studies, all the rest of it. But it becomes essential if we really want to get at what people are looking for, which is ability to do their best work and get some heads down time, as well as being, together when it's appropriate.
Awesome. Well, there's no additional questions in there, but I'd love to open it up if anyone didn't decide to take a second to put anything in the chat, but they'd like to add it. I think we're sort of at the end here, but I'd love to open it to Q&A, and then we'll go back to Dave for some final thoughts. Anybody have any questions that they'd like to just throw out there? Cool. Well, Dave, put you on the spot here to finish it up, and then we'll take a group photo, and maybe we can stick around a little bit out in the hallway, or have Q&A questions, maybe take a tour of campus, whatever people have time for.
Well, no, just a sincere thanks to everybody, especially Lisa, for showing up at 2:30 in the morning, or I think that's what time we started for you. And it was just a great conversation. So thank you so much. And other than that.